Good morning, everyone. This is lecture 6, and before going to today's today's lecture's contents, I just want to highlight that your assessment 1 is due by this Sunday. Okay, it's better to submit before 5 p.m. Okay, Sunday 5 p.m. So when you basically submit your solution, along with that solution, it will be good if you can submit one Word document, and in that document you can basically take the screenshot of your input form, what was the input provided, take screenshot and put in a Word document, and what output has been produced by solution. Okay, it will help me to quickly mark your assessment. Okay, and in case of any issues, if the output which I got on my browser is different from what you have basically produced in your solution, I can figure it out why it's different, and you should get the reward what you have done in your assessment. Okay, so I'm receiving emails from students about their issues. Some students ask me to look about the logic. Now it's very hard for another person to look at the logic and try to tell something. If you're getting some error, then I will be very prompt in reply. If you're asking me some advice, I will quickly look at your code and will hint you to some resources or maybe give you some idea. But again, you are the best person in order to consume that information. Okay, whether the device I have provided you, how that will fit into the complete context of your application. Okay, so let's go to in today's lecture we will basically look at in more detail about Visual Studio .NET, especially building ASP.NET web application using web forms. Okay, this we will go in first part, and second half of this lecture we will look at about visual programming environments in more detail, fair bit of detail. So let's start with this one. So this is agenda for this session. We will look at ASP.NET overview, what's the programming model, and what are the programming basics. So as we know that ASP.NET provides services to create web application, and we are doing it. In your first assessment, you are using ASP.NET using C# or VB.NET language to develop a web application. Okay, so and do you know about what are web services? What's different between web application and web services? Web application, we know the websites which you develop. How they are different from web services? Web services don't have graphical user interface. These are some programs running on certain port. You can request for some information. You can give some information, and in return you can get some response. Okay, so they are called as web services. So like PHP, ASP.NET is server-side technology. There is application server, web server, and so on. The architecture we discussed that basically applies to ASP.NET. The important thing, the major shift would be, previously you did PHP programming in PHP and you did in ASPX as well using C# or VB.NET. You can see the style which you opted is similar. There is no much difference. The way you did programming in PHP, similar fashion you are doing in ASP.NET. But now we are going to the real strength of ASP.NET, which is web forms. And these web form, the idea basically came from Visual Basic Applications, VB6. I'm not sure all of you have heard about Visual Basic 6. That was the major strength of before .NET from the Microsoft company. VB6 was basically drag and drop rapid application development technology for building Windows-based application. So it was very easy, very user-friendly, not much knowledge of programming required. So it was very easy to use and convenient for developing rapid application development. And from VB6 onward, basically Microsoft introduced .NET technologies. Okay, so the strength of VB6 was the forms, drag and drop features, linking data to with those controls was very quick, and so it was rapid application development. Same idea is basically brought into web application development environment using these web forms. And this second half of this course, we will basically focus on this feature. So web forms are basically visually drag and drop of control, and I will show you some snapshots today. So what are the key features of ASP.NET technology? Basically provide web forms, you can easily program them, you can quickly build your application, and there are various ways you can build your application. We will see in Microsoft, if we create a new project, there are various options available. Okay, so why we have this option? Because more precise, rapid application development can be done according to your requirements. There are many options available. So important thing is, the more knowledge you have about Visual Studio, the options provide, you are in better position to create a best solution for your business or for your client. So web application, web services, .NET framework, we all know it's a core strength of ASP.NET technologies. Simple programming model, maintains page state. Now we will see what do we mean by this. As we know that web application, when we submit forms and we go to next page to basically see what has happened. If we go back to the initial page, the information will be lost. So whereas in the case of .NET, there are some built-in features, you can maintain the state of the page. Okay, multi-browser support, no issues with the JavaScript. Microsoft technologies basically take care of those conflicts, especially with respect to JavaScript. Everything is object-oriented in Visual Studio. The controls which we use, they're basically instance of a certain class. They're objects of a certain class. So everything is object-oriented. Session management, cache, debugging. So all the basic features which are available in other languages, they are available as well. On top of that, we have certain advanced controls, advanced web forms that basically increase the application development speed. Simplified validation as well, we will see. This is architecture, and we have discussed before as well that you can see there is common language runtime. So all languages, there are more than 20 languages supported by .NET. They derive from common language specification. Okay, and then we have some specialized classes for creating web application and web services, and specialized classes for creating web forms, because these are two different interface for applications. But we have common ADO.NET. No matter you're building applications for window forms or web application or web services, the data manipulation is similar. Okay, so there is reusability over here. If you have developed some new classes, you extended ADO.NET, came up with the new classes, you can use those for building web application as well as you can use those for building Windows application. And there is common language runtime. And all this is supported in Visual Studio.NET. So let's look at the programming model. As we discussed, it is server-side programming language, and we have controls and events in this case. Okay, in HTML we have controls like input type is equal to text, input type is equal to button. Okay, and when we submit the form, that is one event, form submission. But in this case, we have more advanced controls and more better handling of the events, and I will show you some examples. Okay, and because of advanced controls and events management, less code we need to write. It will be more sort of configuration. We have a control, drop that control on your web form, and then just configure it. Okay, so it's more modular, readable, and maintainable code. So basically, what happens? So on web form, we can basically drag and drop controls. Okay. So in Visual Studio, we have toolbox. I will show you in a second. From toolbox, we can drag and drop these controls. And with these controls, there are certain events attached. Okay. If I quickly show it to you. So this is Visual Studio. I have created a web application, and you can see the structure is a bit different, and I will explain it later on in this lecture. So if I just delete this stuff, so you can see I have button over here. Now this button is not HTML control. This is more advanced ASP.NET control. Okay, I drag and drop this button over here. Now I have a button. If I double click this button, this open C# code behind. Okay, so this is different from what we are doing so far. Okay, so from ASP page, we have a control. If we double click the control, it creates an event that is attached to that button, and when the application would be running and user will click that button, so whatever we write over here will get executed. So you see, the programming model is different what we are doing in assessment 1. It's assessment 1, that is traditional approach. You have a form and you have one submit button. You submit each and everything to the next page. And next page you have a lot of if and else. Okay, it was submit, okay, for submit, then you go and do some logic. Whereas in this case, we just have a button, and with button we have some code attached. So this is totally a different approach. Similarly, with all, we have events attached with them, and this makes programming very easy. Okay, you just drag and drop control, double click it, or and it will create a method. Are there other ways you can create more? You can capture more events, and we will see in upcoming lectures. So in today's lecture, I will basically provide you bird's eye view of this ASP.NET using web forms and Visual Studio. What features does it provide? Okay. So as I mentioned, everything is object in ASP.NET. Okay. So we have this package, and we call them namespaces in ASP.NET, and in workshop 4 and 5 we use data namespaces, okay, for retrieving the data, connecting with the database and retrieving information. So all the controls are basically derived from this control class. Okay, for example, button, link button, grids, they are basically derived from this class. Similarly, the web page, which we call as a web form in ASP.NET, is derived from the page class. So everything which we create from this from toolbox, we drag and drop, it is basically object. Okay, and once page execute, those controls basically initialized, their events will be triggered once and user basically interact with those controls. In ASP.NET we have a feature called as auto post back. Okay, what is post back? Let me give you an example, and this example is uploaded on the blackboard. Okay, so this is a simple web form. If you look over here, I have form tag, and the method of this form tag is post, and action of this form is basically I'm using a PHP variable which is a PHP self. This is basically when this code execute, it will basically print the file of the name. Okay, for example, in this case, when I will run the code, it will become auto post back. So this is the name of this file. So when a file basically submit data to itself, it is called as post back. So in your assessment 1, and in the workshops, you were always submitting data from one page to another page.
So submitting it to itself.
Submitting to itself. So in this case, the action is the file itself. Okay, and if you look over here, I have some code at the top of this form, which basically looks for post action. If something is submitted to this form, then this code will execute. Okay, if I have running example over here, this one, this is that page. Okay, if I just refresh it, so first name 9 10 0, if I submit, see, it's submitted to itself, and the code which I have written over here on the top, it basically grabs these two values, okay, and then it prints the name. And if you look over here, when I submitted the form, the last name is not able to retain what I submitted initially, but the first name is retained over here. How is that possible? Because I have, when I retrieve these values, I basically echo first name over here. So whenever the information is submitted, it will display over here. But if you run the form first time, it will not display anything because there is no value submitted. So this is example of post back, when page submit to itself. All the web forms in ASP.NET, by default, they submit information to itself. So the idea is one form will carry all the logic that is required for a certain business case. Okay, so this is the logic behind. So we have features in ASP.NET. So I gave you an example of PHP. In PHP, you can do auto post back, but you have to write a code to handle it. In ASP.NET, it handles it by himself. And I will, on one slide, I have one example how this is possible. In PHP, I just show you that I have to echo the value of last name in order to show what was entered before. Where in case of ASP.NET, we don't need to do this. Okay. So in PHP, if form is submitted and user has need to come back to the main form, we have to basically fill in the form so that user can easily manipulate the thing. Okay. In whereas ASP.NET, we can manage this very easily. So in ASP.NET, page can maintain its state. Okay. In auto post back in PHP, state was not maintained. I have to code in and retrieve all the value and then give those print those values in the control. Okay. Well, ASP it can be done by itself. Only I need to do is to enable certain properties. But before going to that, one thing important is this auto post back will work only if you have post method in the form. If you have get method, then it will not work. So do you know the difference between post method and get method? So in the form tag, if you go over here, most of the time we used post method. And in one of the workshop, we used, I think it was 5th week workshop, we used a query string and the form had a get method rather than post. So do you know the difference between method post or get? Okay. So in case of post method, when you submit the form, you cannot see anything in the query string. Whereas if you want, whenever you browse some website, you see query strings carry a lot of values.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So whenever the method is get, and I have one example for you, then the information which is being submitted would be available in query string. Okay. So if I run this example, you can see I have method get over here, and rather than post, so whenever you use post method as a form as a form method, then you need to use $post array to retrieve the values from the previous form. Okay, $post object. In case of get, you can use $_get or $request is another way. No matter how data is being submitted, whether it was post method or it was get method, if we use $_request, it can manage both of those way of submitting the data. So if I run this example, auto post back 1, if I type in, see, you can see the information over here in the query string. So this is the difference. Now why we have two methods and why ASP.NET use post rather than get. So in case of get method, we have only 255 characters can be transferred from one form to another form using get method. Whereas in most of these forms, we have more than that data. So that's why we use post method by default in ASP.NET forms. Okay. So these server-side technologies provide us auto post back functionality, and when auto post back is done, it retains the state of the control. Whatever user have typed in, first name, last name, country user have selected, email address he typed in, we can retain all those values within the controls, and it can be done very easily by 2 steps. Okay. And important thing needs to understand it, we are not creating new variables the way I did for last name, first name, and print it as a value. In this case, we are not creating any more variables on server side. Then the question is how these controls can retain their values. How whatever user have entered and is submitted and come back to this form, all values are there. How is that possible when we are not creating any variables on server side? So that is because of view state, and I will come to that. I think next slide I have that information. So by default, ASP.NET provides you these features. They maintain the state of the page, maintain state of the controls. If user go forward, backward, state can be maintained. Now these controls are the building blocks of ASP.NET web application. They can retain their state, okay. They provide you auto post back features and so on. So these components can be built in and available in Visual Studio, okay. I showed you the list box, a button control, link control and so on. There's a number of controls available, or they can be built by third party. So many third party providers, they extended these controls further and provided more advanced controls, okay. There are grids like tables. You can open those grids maybe up to 10 levels, especially in accounting application, because a lot of data is involved. From one grid you can open 10 pop-up grids and you select value, and then you can close those grids, and eventually your final grid will contain updated values and so on. So advanced controls are being built, okay. And you can also extend these controls for your specific needs. So there is extensibility available as well. So there is a variety of control available like button, text, dropbox, calendar, data grid, and rotator validation, and we will use some of these in your upcoming workshops, okay. And one of the key feature of these control is these controls just need the data source. If you tell them the data source, that this is data source from where you need to get information, then that's it. Then those controls can locate the information, can load the information, and can display it to you. So it's more like configuration. You drop the control and you configure the control, rather than you go and start coding the way you did in week 4 and week 5 workshop. In week 4 and week 5 you have to do a lot of coding, and you have to go and look at, okay, where is select statement, where I should or where is a text box I need to display a value. If supplier ID you need to change, you need right now you're getting supply ID and you need to bring in supplier name. You have to write another. You have to create another connection, and you need to create another command. You need to query the database. You need to open the reader. You need to do a lot of stuff. But in case we will see that it's very simple. So we just need to bind the data with the control. As these controls are not simple HTML controls, they are advanced controls. So it means using certain language, an implementation has been done. And it's quite possible that the implementation is not compatible with the browsers, because we have a variety of browsers. We have Netscape, we have Firefox, we have IE and Chrome. And there are some issues. Some applications that run well in Chrome, they may not run in IE. Microsoft applications run very well in IE, but they may not run well in Chrome. So these issues, again, they are catered by the .NET framework. Okay, if there are some incompatibilities, you don't need to worry about them much. Okay, major issues will be addressed by these control itself. For example, depending upon which browsers is being used by the client, they will adjust themselves. So they have all possible scenarios codified in them. So if there is some major difference, especially in JavaScript between Netscape and IE, so this button control will have both implementations. And depending upon which browser is used, it will basically execute that implementation. So again, this is within the control. You see how powerful those controls are? And they adjust their look and feel according to the browser which is being used. Now, code behind pages. As I mentioned in the first lecture, initially in first assessment, whatever we are doing in ASPX page. And we are using HTML control. We haven't used any advanced control. Okay. So there are two styles of creating ASP.NET pages. One is we add the controls and the code in ASPX page. So in assessment 1, we added the code in ASPX page. Okay, and we ran that, and your first assessment you're doing it. But we didn't use that ASP.NET control. We just used simple HTML controls. That's why you can draw a parallel between PHP and ASP.NET using C#. Exactly same scenario, and you will see that the way you implemented C#, similar fashion PHP provides a solution as well. But the real difference you will see when we use basically these ASP.NET controls and the web forms that provides code behind features. So one way is everything is ASPX page, okay, and the second is we have a code behind page. And what is code behind? Let me show you in Visual Studio. So when we create project in ASP.NET, for example, this is default.aspx, on which basically I added a control. Now with this ASPX page, we have this default.css. Now in second part of the lecture, I will tell you how we create application using web forms and so on. Okay, but once we have this project, which is basically web form based ASP.NET web application, each ASPX page will have one CS file and one designer file. We have nothing to do with designer file because this initializes the controls. Okay, this is a code behind page in which we can write the C# code. Okay, and if you go to ASPX page source, you will see that previously we used to use only in the page declarative we used to specify only language. Now we are specifying other information as well, and one of the element is code behind, which tells the application server that this ASPX file has a CS file which is separate C# file, and the code which is attached to these controls is in that file. So this is the major shift which you will see in your second assessment, and this code behind file will contain all the C# code. And you can see that we have namespaces over here. There is a different syntax when you do it. You import them on web page, and we did in workshop 4 and 5. Over here, this is how we import them. So with every ASPX file, you will see there is a CS file. Okay. So code behind is a very powerful feature. It separates the ASPX page from the code. So designer can work on ASPX page, and the coder, they can basically develop the code in C# files. And code behind attribute in ASPX page tells you, okay, which CS file is basically attached with ASPX page. Programming basics. Any HTML page can be renamed as ASPX, and we did in first assessment. We created an HTML page and renamed it ASPX. In that case, it did not create CS file. If you look at your ASPX pages, it will not have a CS file code behind. But when we will create new pages as a web forms, then they will have. Okay. So page may contain, for example, directives, and we use this in our first assessment, and we will keep on using it for second assessment as well. Server controls will start with ASP. Okay, all the server controls will have ASP in their start. Whereas if you look at HTML controls, they start with like input, type text, input, and so on, select or so, and so on. But in case of server controls, they will start with ASPX. Okay. We use code blocks script. We can use in web forms as well. These are data binding expression in which we don't need to write response.write, and whatever variable we put in, it will get printed. So these are data binding expressions. Okay, and in grid we will see their use as well. And these are server side. If you want to comment multiple line, you can use those tags. So you will see that all these controls will have one attribute, which is run at server. Even if you have in basic HTML controls, and if you basically specify this attribute run at server, then they will be accessible in code behind. Code behind a separate file. If you want to access these controls which are in ASPX page, you need to specify this run at server attribute. Okay. So on all ASP.NET controls, we have this attribute. Okay. And this tells that on server side, the objects of these controls will be available for you to access them, retrieve values, or you can assign values using your C# code. And each of these controls, either ASP or basic HTML controls, they have ID attribute, and this ID is basically identify those controls, those objects uniquely in that page. Okay, and we use IDs to access the controls and update their values. So these advanced controls, when we basically drop them on the form, we can basically set their values. For example, text can be set to few, so that when user see this button, it would have some value. Okay, and through programming interface, which is code behind. In code behind, we can also access these controls using their ID, and we can assign them a value. For example, over here, if I quickly can show you. So, for example, button 1. So this was the button which we added on this page. If I go design, so this was the button, and this is code behind for this. And if I write button 1, so I can access it. Okay, and then if I press dot, these are the all methods available to me to manipulate it. Okay, so this is when you're in code behind and you want to modify something. But if you are on interface and you click this button, you get this properties window.
Do most people use that? Because I always use that.
It depends. It depends. So if you want to set something, you can use this properties window. So all the methods or attributes which are available in code behind, you can also access them from here. And you can see you can define the color. If I scroll down, you can define the behavior. See, post back URL. There are many things which we will go during the workshops. See? And you can define union ID and so on. In short, using this interface or going to the source, you can go in the source and you can change it as well from here, or in code behind. So different ways you can access the attributes and you can set the attributes.
If you use code behind, would it display in the properties?
It will get updated.
Okay.
Yeah. Because these views properly reading information from code behind or from ASPX and keep them synchronized. If those files are not synchronized, you will get an error. Okay, so you have ASPX page that is specifying properties. You have code behind and you have properties windows. So if things are not synchronized, you will get an error. Okay. So manipulate these controls. Now coming back to that post back. When page is post back, they retain their value. And how is that possible? With the hidden field, and the name of hidden field is view state. Okay. If you look at the HTML code, and in next upcoming workshops I will show you. Do you know about hidden field? Okay. Like input field, if you add input type as text, it will show to user input box. Hidden field is which is not visible to user, but you can use it for your programming. I can define a hidden field in input type is equal to hidden, and I can give value as this is first form. And when this form is submitted, on the next page I can write a code that if this is first form, then do something. So that is for programming purposes. That field is, the value of that field is not visible to user, it's hidden. But you can use that hidden field for programming purposes. So this hidden field is view state. So whatever user has typed in, all that information would be saved in this view state. So information is saved on the client side. All the page state we are talking about, all the controls that will retain their value is on the client side, and all the information is in view state. So when page is submitted and reloaded, the ASP application server, when execute the code, this view state, the value from view state will be picked up and then assigned to the control. Okay. So each of these controls basically they may need some input, or we can bind data to them. For example, text box and check boxes, they need some input. They may need user to type in or put some value. Whereas drop down list, data grid, we can attach the value so that when page displayed, it can show you something to the user. And upcoming labs we will do this stuff. And we can disable this page state. If we want our application not to save the state, that when user submit the form and come back, everything should be empty, we can disable this state. So enable view state is one of the property of the page. If set to false, page state would not be maintained. If it is set to true, page state would be maintained. So one property provides you that feature. If you would be doing PHP, then you can see that how big hassle is that one. You have, when you submit, you have to retrieve all the values of whatever is being submitted and then assign those values to the control. Whereas in this case, this is one property. So in these pages, I showed you that when you add a button, double click it, there is an event attached to it. Drop down list, if they have events attached to them. So these are the events which user can create. There are some predefined events as well. And a couple of those events are page load and page unload. Page load event will be called whenever page is loaded. Okay, when application server start processing the page and give HTML output to the browser, it will basically first start with the page load. And when you close the window, page unload is called, and so on. So, and we saw that with button we have click event, with text box, which is input field, we have change event. It uses something change in the text. We have key press event. Okay, all the JavaScript events. If some of you have done JavaScript, the JavaScript events are basically handled in this fashion. Key press, something is changed, and so on. So when this is page event lifecycle. So when page is loaded, first of all, page init is called. So this is a method which we don't need to access, and this method basically controls are initialized. All the controls which you're using, they are basically built on top of basic HTML controls. So those need to be initialized first, and all that is done in page init. After that, page load event is called, and we have access to the page load event. Okay, if I go back quickly to this application CSS, so you see we have page load event, and in page load event, all the controls that have been initialized now, I can access them. So when page is loading, I want to show some to the user. First, I can do all the stuff over here. So this is, you can think of main method like in Java. Okay, so that whatever you want to initialize, whatever you want to write something, welcome message for the user, this is the area which you need to load on. So page load is, we have this method. We have, sorry. So after page is loaded, whatever user do interact with the page, those events will trigger. And when page is destroyed or closed, then page unload event is called. So in ASP.NET, page events have a life cycle. Okay, and this is the order in which they proceed. So in page load, we can basically do the we can initialize few controls with some specific values. We can give welcome messages and whatever you want to set for our application so that user can interact with them. We can use in the page load event. Okay, and you can see that in page load event, arguments are object and event areas. So this object is basically a page itself. So when page object is available, in that page we have all the controls. So it means all controls are available to you as well. So simply by typing in the ID of that control that has run at server attribute, you can access those controls. So message is a text box or maybe it's a label, and dot text basically is one of its property, and whatever we have in text box 1, which is another control, so whatever is in text box 1, it would be assigned to message.text. So you can do this stuff in page load event. Now page load is fired every time when you submit information. Okay, because this is auto post back. Remember we have drop down menus in which when you select country, page post back and then load the cities. If you change the country, page load backs and then load cities of that specific country. So that is own change event. Okay, so when page is loading back and again, then you need some code within the page load that can tell you, okay, is this first time post back or it is second time, third time or so on. So if it is not, so using this if situation we can identify if page is post back, it tells us that page is postback. Okay, when first time you load the page, this would be false. When first time page is loaded, is postback is false. That's why we are saying that if this page postback is false, then initialize the variables or display some messages. But if it is postback, then don't do this stuff. Then do rest of the stuff. So this is how we can differentiate between first time page loading and then subsequent page postbacks.
So the second time the page loads, don't do any of this stuff.
Don't do any of this stuff. So these you can see that either by clicking, double clicking the controls or playing with the controls, you can it creates a method, or you can type in the method, for example, on click, and this is the name of the function that is created in the code behind. So this is the method name, the function name, procedure name that will be triggered when this button is clicked. So this is text box. Whenever something is changed, then this method would be called. So this is the name of the method that would be in code behind. It will not be in ASPX file, it will be in CS file. And this is example of that button click. In button click, again, object S and event arguments E. So in this case, S is basically the button itself, okay, and event arguments basically provide some extra information, okay, to handle that event. And this is information over here about the sender, which is the control itself, and arguments E, additional information, what value has been changed, okay, what's the current selected value. For example, when you selected country, which country has been selected, so that will come from event arguments E object, okay, and the control itself will be drop down list. And when page unload is triggered, which will be triggered by default, or you can code this function as well, that if page unload happen, then we need to complete the lock, we need to do something, we need to destroy some important variables, session variables, to ensure that session is destroyed, and so on. So namespaces, we have used such syntax when we use namespaces in workshop 4 and 5 in ASPX page, and these are some of the namespaces, and we will be using these in upcoming workshops. And you can look at, for example, if you have used lists, they are from this class, namespace, system.collection. Okay. So in ASPX page, we use this format. Whereas in case of C# we use using directive, using then namespace name. Okay, so this is syntactical difference. So page class basically holds all the controls, and it provides us various methods like dealing some attributes of application, caching, view state, for example, postback event, request response object. So these attributes methods are available with the page class. Once you have access to the page object, then you can manipulate them. Similarly, data bind load control, and we will see in upcoming labs. So .NET provides different data providers to connect to the databases. As we know, we have Excel, we have Lotus Notes, we have SQL, we have MySQL, and there are DB2, there are many databases available. So they provide different different libraries in order to access them. For example, SQL.NET is for SQL Server, specialized classes to manage SQL. OLDB can be used for Excel files and so on, and ODBC for access and other type of databases that support ODBC. Okay. So in short, there are different packages. You have to identify which is most suitable for you. So using command object, we can access the information. So this is regarding code behind. If you basically code by yourself in code behind to retrieve the information. And by the way, we have done this in ASPX page as well. So you can write this code in ASPX page as well. And if you recall, we created connection string, and then we open the connection object. In this case, we are using SQL connection. So this class SQL connection is specifically for establish connection with SQL Server. In your second assessment, selection of the database or choice of database is up to you. You can use the built-in feature of this Visual Studio to create a database, which will create SQL Server database. You can use MySQL, you can use Access, and so on. So it's a matter of your choice. Okay, and we will discuss in upcoming lectures as well. So this is for SQL connection. We create command and then we we execute the command, and we create SQL data reader, we execute a reader, and through reader we can iterate through all the records. So it's simply this is different class than what we use. We use OLEDP connection, OLEDP command, OLEDP data reader, and so on. So in this case we have SQL connection, and this is a reader. So you execute a reader and then you can iterate through the records. The important thing which I want to mention over here, that this way of accessing the data is called as connected data. You are reading from the database one by one. Okay, you are connected to database and reading the records. So that was the one way. Second way is disconnected data, and this idea is basically in .NET, that you don't need to remain connected with the database. Why not read the data, bring into the RAM, bring into your application, whatever updates you want to do, because there will be many transactions running in your application. So update the data in memory, apply all the updates, add, delete for maybe 1 hour, and then write back all the data in your database.
Bring everything in an array or something.
Yeah,
Alter it, and then
they will be definitely not array, but they will complex data structures. But array, you can think of that. That's fine. So in this case, we have disconnected data. You can, in simple terms, you have a database in your RAM. You are manipulating it, and once everything is done, you are satisfied. You can write back all the data to original database. So this is disconnected data. And how we can achieve this disconnected data? Because we have specialized objects called as data sets. Data sets is that can hold various data tables. So data set can hold various data tables. So you can read the table of categories, you can read the table of products, and you can bring them in the data set. Okay, and then your application can manipulate the data set. In this case, you don't need to connect to database again. It's one-time connection. Retrieve the information and then update it. So especially if in enterprise level application where applications are very data intensive, if every application, instance of application, maybe there are 1,000 instances in enterprise, if they go and connect to database server, it basically choke the server. There will be a lot of burden on the server. And again, databases are locked, records are locked, it's very difficult to handle. So in this case, we bring in the data and disconnect it from the main server, we update it, and then we write it back afterwards. So how does this work? We have specialized classes like SQL data adapters. And what these adapters do, these adapters basically have fill method, and they take into argument as an argument the data set and the table. Okay, so you create the connections, you create the commands, all the stuff, then you basically create a data set, and then you use SQL adapter command, class, object, and fill method, which takes into account the data set and the table. So when this command is executed, this basically reads in the data table and put it in a data set. So you can basically fill the data set with multiple tables. Okay, and with these controls, data grid view, for example, is a data control. We only need to specify what should be the data source for these controls. Okay, we don't need to write those commands in detail, and we will see even through graphical user interface we will be doing most of the things. This will only take 2 steps. Select the data source and bind the data, and it will display each and everything. So things are very simple in ASP.NET. And another important feature of ASP.NET is master page. Okay, so I mentioned to you that in PHP you can use include statement, especially for menus. Instead of creating menu in every HTML page, you can basically include, you can create a navigation, menu file and include in each and every PHP file. It will basically bring in consistency, and only one file you need to modify. Okay, so in ASP.NET we have a concept of master page, and I will show you example I think on next slide or maybe in upcoming workshop, that if you create your project, if you create your web form from master page which is being designed, then your header, for example, header and menu will be fixed. Only the contents that are defined in the center, especially in this figure, you can change them. For example, if we have 2 files, default.aspx, author.aspx, and they inherit master page, then the header and footer menu will remain same. So it's the same concept of include over here, but it is being managed by Visual Studio. Okay, if you are interested in using MySQL with your application, then you need a special version of MySQL. Okay, and this is the link. If you click this link, you will get more information about that. Okay, you can also install SQL Express if you want to do it with SQL Server. But you can also create database within Visual Studio. That will be SQL database, and I will give you one. I will show you one example in upcoming lectures. So in short, if you're using MySQL, then this link provides some information how you can connect Visual Studio with MySQL. Okay, if it does not work, do come back to me and we can figure it out. So yeah, I took 10 minutes extra for this first session, but I wanted to finish this in one go. Any question? Okay, so next off will not take much time and it will be quick.